Slater Crusaders, how are you? Here we are. A lot happened yesterday, a lot to cover. All right, a couple things. First, what happened? An American Reaper drone. This thing is 66 feet long. Started off when we first used these as a surveillance drone, but now we could put missiles on this thing. And it's controlled by a pilot on the ground. Not sure where the pilot was. He could have been somewhere in the Middle East, could have been in Poland, could have been in America. We're not exactly sure. Maybe we'll find that out. But this drone followed the top Iranian military official, Qasem Soleimani, and we'll get to this in a minute, the head of the guy who led the militias in Iraq to attack our embassy a couple days ago. His name's Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis. And we'll get to more coming up here in just a little bit. But we were following Qasem Soleimani. That's the name you're going to hear over and over again, Qasem Soleimani. The general, Qasem, arrived on a plane at the Baghdad airport, either from Syria or Lebanon, at 12:30 in the morning. He was met on the tarmac at the airport by that other guy in a car. They got in two separate cars, I believe. The cars drove off. Before they left the airport, 4 precision missiles were fired down from that drone, and they're dead. The general's body was identified for us with a picture of a ring on his finger. There you have it, right there. That's the number 2 guy in Iran, was. So, first thing, stop and think about how terrifying that is if you're an Iranian official. Think about that. Holy cow. They don't have those type of capabilities against us. So first of all, the level of intel necessary. We knew exactly where the guy was and all that. But the military capability of that. Just think for a second, if Iran had drones flying over or near around American airspace, and at any time they could launch a missile on a precision missile at any time, we can't relate to that. But the fear that this clearly unleashes in the hearts of Iranian leaders, maybe they've always known that we could do this, but now we have a commander-in-chief who will do this. And that's new. Think about also how I don't want to say bold, that's not the right word, but what this general thought of America, that he could fly into the Baghdad airport and think that that'd be fine. and maybe it has been for a long time, but you can't just fly into the Baghdad airport. Like, we're going to blow you up right now. We'll launch missiles on you if you do that again. But the fact that he thought he could and be fine says a lot about what our foreign policy has been for, the last decades. Literally yesterday, this general said that Iran doesn't fear U.S. threats and that Iran is ready to defeat the United States. Yesterday, he said that Iran will destroy all you possess. Speaking about America, we will destroy all you possess. And within 24 hours, he took 4 missiles to the chin. We shouldn't be surprised. They shouldn't be surprised. Trump wrote this. He said this in a tweet the other day. He said, Iran will be held fully responsible for lives lost or damage incurred at any of our facilities. This was after the attack on our embassy in Baghdad. They will pay a very big price. This is not a warning. It is a threat. Happy New Year. He sent that out, it was like 1:30 on New Year's Eve. He wasn't kidding. Iran will pay a very big price. Okay, so that's what happened. Now let's back it up here for a minute before we move forward. A couple points. First, we need to be careful listening to people on Twitter who literally could not point to Iran on a map and who have never heard of this Iranian general before in their entire lives. This reminds me of a couple months ago when everyone on the left freaked out about Trump abandoning the Kurds, and they've never heard of the Kurds in their entire lives. So be aware of that. Second, I still can't trust the media on any of this. We mentioned this yesterday about the embassy attack. Remember, the New York Times called them Iraqi mourners. This is just a couple of weeks after the Washington Post called al-Baghdadi, the head of ISIS, an austere religious scholar. I have zero trust in the media to cover or analyze any of this even close to accurately. And that's why yesterday we talked to one of the heroes of Benghazi, Mark Geist. He is a man who I trust and we can trust. You cannot trust any of the media establishment to cover this stuff at all. And that's unfortunate. Okay, that being said, I don't really trust our government to tell the truth either. And I'm not sure why anyone would. So just for instance, Pompeo said that Soleimani was planning imminent attacks on Americans. Maybe. I mean, like, probably. He's already killed hundreds of Americans. We'll get to that in a minute here, if not thousands. So he probably was. But I don't know. How do we know he was? And what do we know? What? I'm skeptical of any statements our government puts out too, because we should always be. Our government, even though now it's my team, right? Our government doesn't have a great track record of telling the American people the truth when it comes to foreign policy. So we need to use great effort to wade through, first, the ignorance from Twitter pundits, to wade through the bias from media pundits, and to wade through the lies from government pundits. And that's a lot. That's a tall order. But we have to if you want to know the truth. Final background point. This one's hard. We're just embarking on this. It's going to be a long road here. Try not to join a team on this one. Oh, that's such a tough urge. We have such an instinct now, especially to rush to sides. And it usually breaks down into two. Maybe there's a third team, and you have to join your tribal membership, and you have to agree with every single thing that team stands for, right? You may join that team because you agree with one aspect of it, but then you're caught in this team, and you have to agree with now everything that team does. Fight that urge on this. It's too important to do that. It's going to be hard to not say, I like Trump, or I forget Trump, I like America, therefore this is entirely a good decision. And I'm in support of every single thing that Trump does. Like, that's probably not right. Or flip it around, I'm seeing a ton of progressives who hate Trump and therefore are coming to the defense of Qasem Soleimani. You're like, all right, hold on. That can't be right either. Both of those to me are equally lazy, maybe. You're better than that. And I urge all of us to find nuance throughout this entire process. Find the nuance, try and find wisdom throughout. Give you an example. Our very own Jesse Kelly tweeted this just a few hours ago. He said, yeah, I can oppose America's absurd neocon foreign policy, which he and I both do, and we both did a lot a week or two ago talking about the Afghanistan papers. I can do that while also celebrating the death of a terrorist piece of rat vomit who killed our brave warriors. Okay, so there's nuance in that position there. Many seemingly different things can be true at the same time. It's possible to be simultaneously happy that this terrible person is dead and to think that he and Iran deserved it. And it's also, at the same time, you can also be concerned about the consequences of it. And you can also not want this to escalate into a full-blown war. You can want him dead and not want a full-blown war, right? There's nuanced positions that we can take throughout this, and I encourage us all to find them because that's probably where the truth is. One last tweet here. This is Matt Walsh. He said, I'm not in favor of regime change wars. Me either. And I don't want to be world police. Me either. But taking out a monstrous scumbag who's been killing Americans for decades and staged an attack on our embassy is neither of those. It's appropriate, just, and necessary. Anti-war absolutism is silly. I like those nuanced positions. I think that's right. I'll end this segment with this one because we got a ton to do today. This is Pascal Emmanuel Gobry, PEG. He says Trump does have a Middle East strategy. He does. And this is really interesting because people on the left in particular think that Trump is reckless and he's just launching missiles out everywhere and all that. I disagree. I think he does have a strategy. The strategy is to reduce our footprint in the Middle East, but in the words of this French guy, also punch Iran in the mouth every once in a while so they don't get too cocky, right? That's a nuanced position because so if you took Bush's neocon position, we need a bigger footprint. And then you take Obama's, total like appeasement position, and we're never going to punch Iran in the mouth ever. We're just going to give them pallets of cash every once in a while. Like those are the two extremes. And if anything, Trump is a moderate. He's taking a moderate position. It's not this huge nation building thing, or he's not advocating we build a $750 million embassy that's 10 times larger than our embassy in Beijing, right? That's the neocon strategy. And it's not Obama's pathetic, here's $1.7 billion in cash on a pallet delivered at your front door approach. Those are the two extremes. I don't think either of those are right. And I think what Trump is doing now, it is indeed a plan. I think it might be a nuanced and wise one. And that's for no big wars, but also put the fear of God in our enemies, which clearly they don't have anymore. They haven't had. Now they do. I will take a break. What has this guy done? What's this Soleimani guy done in the past? And what's next? Let's war game this out a little bit. We're going to do it next. True story. Mike Slater, really glad you're here. Spread the word. Slater Crusaders, welcome back. I'm so fired up. I'm so glad you're here. We have so much to do, and this is all so important. So who is this guy? Who is this Qasem Soleimani? What has he done to Americans? Why did he deserve to die? I can save us a lot of time if you want the short answer. This is Senator Ben Sasse, who I like very much. He said, this is very simple. General Soleimani is dead because he was an evil bastard who murdered Americans. That's it. That's it. Lindsey Graham said, wow, the price of killing and injuring Americans has just gone up drastically. That's what we talked about a little bit in the last segment. He said Soleimani was one of the most ruthless and vicious members of the Ayatollah's regime. He had American blood on his hands. We could go on all day with these Republican statements. So let's just play this one. This is Steve Scalise.
President Trump took incredibly decisive action to take out the head of this major terrorist organization. IRGC has been a major terrorist organization. Soleimani himself responsible for the deaths of over 600 of our men and women in uniform. This guy's been one of the major terrorists, worst, most brutal terrorists in the world. This is on the same level of, you can go down the line, but al-Baghdadi, of course, the most recent. Even when you look at, where this ranks, this is right up there, as one of the major attacks, taking out one of the worst terrorists that has been a threat to the United States. Clearly, as the Pentagon has said, this was a defensive action because they were seeing other things getting ready to happen. And so it wasn't just taking out somebody for what happened at the embassy, but it was also, he was probably getting ready to direct other attacks against.
Yeah, so that last part, I don't need that last part. Just to go back to the idea of like not believing our government, everything they say. I don't necessarily believe that he was planning more attacks. I do believe he was planning more attacks, but I don't think that's even necessary to use in an argument. I think what he's already done is enough to justify killing him. But I agree with everything else Steve Scalise said right there, except for one other point that we're going to get to in a little bit here. To compare this to bin Laden or Baghdadi in terms of this man's evilness and lives lost, people that he's killed, et cetera, that's fair, but it is fundamentally different because this guy had an official position in an actual government, right? Al-Baghdadi, head of ISIS, bin Laden, head of Al-Qaeda. Those weren't states. This is the Iranian government. It's essentially number 2 guy in the Iranian government. So that is a fundamental difference that we'll talk about here in just a little bit. But that's the Republican position. I agree with almost all of that. Then you get the hack statements like this. This is from Chris Murphy, senator from Connecticut. So this was New Year's Eve. He tweeted this out New Year's Eve. So this is after the attacks on our embassy. He said, Trump has rendered America impotent in the Middle East. No one fears us. No one listens to us. Americans have been reduced to huddling in safe rooms, hoping the bad guys will go away. What a disgrace. I agree with that. But then after we go and we kill this guy, Did Trump assassinate the second most powerful person in Iran, knowingly setting off a potential massive regional war? So when Trump didn't respond, even though he did, right? But even when he didn't respond, we're weak and pathetic. And then Trump does respond, and Trump did an awful, terrible thing, right? So that's a hack move. You're going to get a lot of Democrats against this as well because they think it will escalate tensions in the Middle East. Have you been to the Middle East? Have you heard of this place before? Iran's already been attacking us. They've been attacking us and our allies for a long time. This guy specifically for 22 years. That's a very odd take to believe that these terrible people need to be staying in power because they're the ones who keep things stable. We don't want to keep things stable. So we can't do anything over there ever because of fear that we may escalate something or things may become unstable. It's the Middle East, pretty unstable. And one thing I don't get, and be careful of this take. I see a lot of versions of this as well. People saying, well, we can't do this thing because they may retaliate. Yeah. But you still should do the thing if the thing is righteous and good to do. You could have said that about bin Laden. Oh, you can't kill bin Laden. Might make al-Qaeda mad. They might retaliate. Can't kill al-Baghdadi. ISIS might retaliate. The argument of this may raise tensions. That would work if this Iranian general specifically hadn't been killing Americans for decades. If we just kill this guy out of the blue, then yeah, that argument would make sense. Like, ooh, they're gonna be pretty mad and retaliate. But he hasn't been, this isn't out of the blue. This is a long time coming, maybe decades too long. So the New Yorker wrote a piece about this guy in 2013. Let me give a quick little background on this. We're gonna talk more about this guy's personality and his charisma and motivations. We're gonna do more of that next week when we can slow down a little bit. Right now, we're just trying to throw out a lot at you. But this general, he runs the Quds Force. So this is a unit of Iran's Revolutionary Guard. You may see it written, and I think Steve Scalise even said this. He said IRGC. You may hear that a lot, IRGC. That's Islamic, it's not Iranian, it's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. So you have the IRGC, and then you have the Quds Force. We think it's about 10 to 20,000 people. The Quds Force is a group that supports really terrorist groups outside of Iran. That's their main mission. The word Qud means holy, but it's in reference to Jerusalem because Iran wants to liberate Jerusalem from the Jews, right? So that's their ultimate force here of supporting terrorism outside of Iran. So this is from the New Yorker in 2013. He said, Soleimani took command of the Quds Force 15 years ago, so it's been 22 years ago now. And in that time, he sought to reshape the Middle East in Iran's favor, working as a power broker and as a military force, assassinating rivals, arming allies, and for most of the decade, directing a network of military groups that killed hundreds of Americans in Iraq. You heard Steve Scalise say 600. The U.S. Department of Treasury has sanctioned Soleimani for his role in supporting the Assad regime in Syria and for abetting terrorism. And yet he has remained mostly invisible to the outside world, even as he runs agents and directs operations. Quote, Soleimani is the single most powerful operative in the Middle East today, John McGuire, a former CIA officer in Iraq, told me, and no one's ever heard of him. How about that? I had a tweet here. Where did I put this? This is from, I have to find it in the next segment. It's from one of our general's books. I'll have to find it in the next. I'll find it in the next segment here. Sorry, I thought I had it popped up. But the point, basically, this guy was saying, he was telling one of our generals that Soleimani was saying, I'm the one who controls everything. I'm really the number one guy when it comes to our foreign policy. So this is an incredibly high level and important guy that we took out. So again, we'll talk more about his motivations and who he is and his charisma. He's a short little guy. So how can he have so much power? How did he get, he reports directly to the Ayatollah. So in many ways, he's even more important than the president of Iran is. And how has he also been able to remain invisible to the outside world for so long? How could he be, as this guy said, the single most powerful operative in the Middle East today, and no one's ever heard of them. So we'll do more of that next week. If nothing else, if you're looking for like one tangible thing, it's believed that this is the guy who provided Iraqi militants with bombs that could penetrate our American armor, which has obviously resulted in the death of many Americans. He's the guy who goes out and supports the terrorist organizations. So yes, as bad as bin Laden, as bad as Baghdadi, but he works for the government. So it's a little bit different. Okay, so that's him. What's next? What do we do, or what's going to happen next? Some possibilities. I mean, who knows? This is truly uncharted territory. Like, when's the last time the American government killed a government leader? Right? This is different. This is some uncharted territory, at least in the last 50 or so years. So some possibilities. First, Iran attacks oil facilities in the Gulf to punish us and spike oil prices. They'll probably do that. I wonder, though, how effective that is these days with America producing so much of our own oil now. I don't know if that move will be as crippling as it would have been a couple decades ago or even 5 years ago, but they'll probably end up doing it. Second, Saudi Arabia is going to get in the game here, perhaps. These two hate each other. Iran Shia, Saudi Arabia Sunni. Saudi Arabia could start attacking Iran directly or vice versa. You're going to hear more from Saudi Arabia. The French guy who we quoted in the last segment, he says the best case scenario, and this is what I believe we should all be praying for, is that Iran now understands that Trump is the first president that we've had in a long time who's serious about limiting Iranian expansion and influence. And we're going to shoot missiles at you if you mess around. So calm the heck down. That's best case scenario. Not sure how likely that is. Here's his quote. He said, a combination of better deterrence and the loss of Soleimani's personal talent. So let me, quick sidebar. So you're going to hear a lot of analysis of people say, well, if you take out the head of, let's say, ISIS, then you're just going to have someone else come to power, and they may be even worse, right? And there's truth to that, but this is a little bit different because this guy was a talented general. It's going to be hard if you're an Iranian to replace this guy. So the loss of Soleimani's personal talent mean Iran's proxy organizations in the Middle East weaken, Iranian influence is lessened, and stability goes up by some marginal but real amount. That's what I think we can hope for out of this move. Let's pray for that. David French quoted a friend of his who was in the intel world and called this move a brushback pitch. And that's hopeful. That's what we want. So in baseball, the pitcher will sometimes throw a high and inside pitch, right? High and inside to intimidate the batter and brush him back, right? Let's hope for that, but killing the number 2 guy in Iran is probably going to be seen as a little more than a high and inside pitch, right? We just shot a missile at his head, right? But, and we'll get to this a little bit later in the show, mostly next week, this is really the only type of language that the Iranians and people in the Middle East generally speak. This is the language they speak. They view the world entirely through the lens of strong and weak. We don't view the world that way. So we're going to talk about the cultural differences between the American Western worldview and the Middle Eastern worldview. They see the world as strong and weak. They see everything through that lens. Weak, for instance, sending pallets of cash. Strong, for instance, killing their top general from the sky. They see that as strong. That's their language. So, to me, it seems like a little more than a high and inside pitch, but to them, that might be all this is. And they know we're serious now, and that's good. So the brushback in this scenario would be Iran chills out for a while. Not a lasting peace, but stands down for a time. Let's hope for that. Probably what will happen is Iran's going to lash out at our allies with a bunch more proxy battles. It's a fact now that they made a major miscalculation by attacking our embassy, the American embassy in Baghdad. That is a direct attack, and they pay a price for that. So they're going to be a little smarter now and fight these little proxy battles and try and paper cut us everywhere they can, but not hit America or American sovereign soil that an embassy is. But still, now they know that there's a huge cost by attacking us directly. We'll see if we're going to impose a cost if they attack us by proxy. We'll see if we come back just as hard. We'll end here. This is David French, who, by the way, David French, no fan of Donald Trump at all. He said, bottom line, the Trump administration has taken a bold, justifiable action against Iran. But the next steps are vital, requiring strategic vision and tactical agility. I feel real joy at Soleimani's demise, and I feel real concern about what comes next. That is fair. True story with Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back. We're going to talk more about Iran coming up in just a little bit here, but I want to talk to our next guest, Bethany Mandel, who is an editor at Ricochet. Bethany, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good to talk to you. You are one of my favorite people on Twitter because you have the perfect mix between politics and parenting as a mom of four and a homeschooling mom. So I appreciate that mix very much.
Thank you.
You've also been blogging a lot lately about the rise of anti-Semitic. I don't even know if it's a rise. I think it's always been high, right? But the anti-Semitic attacks across our country recently, and a lot of people have been either not tuned into it, and the media's not been covering it, or a lot of this happened over break, so maybe people haven't been paying any attention. But can you give us an overview of what's been happening in terms of anti-Semitism in the last, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks? What have you seen?
Sure. So there has always been anti-Semitism, and unfortunately there always will be anti-Semitism. The change in the last few weeks and few months, and honestly in the last year or two, is that the attacks have gone from sort of vandalism to physical violence. And so we're seeing in a lot of, mostly Brooklyn is the major area, although obviously we just saw the stabbing attack in Muncie. Mostly in Brooklyn, there are random physical altercations between groups of young people and visibly Jewish Orthodox Jews. And they are men, they are women, they are the elderly. There was one video that went viral on Twitter about a year ago of a man who, there was a kid sort of walking slowly behind his parents, and a guy stood in front of the kid and just started yelling at him, and he filmed it on Twitter. And that unfortunately went viral in a way that people were like, haha, isn't this funny? Not like, oh my God, what a monster. So this is not new, and it's not just directed at sort of men. It's women and children are getting victimized as well.
And I've seen tons of randomness. I've seen security camera footage, and a Jewish man walks by, and a group of people just belt the guy from behind, right? Just like, and then run away. So like total randomness. Why? Why? What's the tension? And you mentioned Brooklyn specifically, but what's the tension happening now?
So, I mean, I think that there's been a rise in anti-Semitism for a long time. The New York Times actually wrote a piece about a year ago as well that said, there's this rise in violence against Jews in Brooklyn, but nobody's really paying attention to it because it can't be pegged to President Trump. And that's something that the New York Times said. And it's also, it's not only it can't be pegged to President Trump, and it's an inconvenient racial narrative that's an uncomfortable one to have. And it's also just, you can't peg it to one thing. It's very easy to say, there's this president and we think he's an anti-Semitism and therefore. But there's no easy therefore here. The reasons are complex. Media coverage of Orthodox Jews is definitely a part of it. And just also public perception of Orthodox Judaism, specifically Hasidic Judaism. People don't know Hasidic Jews, and they sort of live in their own enclaves and worlds. And so it's easy to dehumanize people who look different and who you don't know. So that's definitely led to a lot of this animosity that has risen over the last year, too.
What do we need to know about the, the names escape me. What are they, like the Israelites, like the Black Israelites, or like right? What are they called again?
The Black Hebrews.
That's right. Who are these cats?
So they are not generally players in this equation. I mean, most of these assaults are not happening from the Black Hebrews. They, I mean, obviously are at fault for Jersey City, which was a massive potential. I mean, it wasn't just it was what it was that 4 people died, and it was a horrible tragedy as it was, but the media actually stopped talking about the attack in Jersey City. The intended target wasn't that kosher supermarket, according to the mayor of Jersey City. It was the school next door with 50 children. And the only thing that stopped the attackers was a massive security, not a massive security presence, but they had security in place at the Jersey City school that when they saw that the door couldn't be busted down, they diverted to the kosher supermarket. But the initial plan was a mass murder at a school.
And you're saying the argument is almost like, well, it doesn't get a lot of coverage because it wasn't supposed to be the kosher market. So
I mean, it didn't get a lot of coverage because it was Black Hebrews, which people don't understand, and there's that racial element also. And it didn't get a lot of coverage because honestly, people don't care about ultra-Orthodox Jews in the same way. I mean, so if you compare the attack in Jersey City with Pittsburgh, the difference is two. The big difference: the attacker was not a white supremacist; he was a Black Hebrew, and the victims were Orthodox Jews, not sort of more regular-looking Jews that were more assimilated. Yeah. And the difference in the coverage was those two things, I think, quite equally.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so what do we do? What do we do with this?
That's a great question. I mean, in the short term, security at Jewish institutions needs to be raised. It would be nice if Brooklyn Jews were able to defend themselves more. There's a campaign happening in Brooklyn right now where they're giving out pepper spray and they're fundraising for pepper spray. That is a solution. And I've seen visibly Jewish friends who live in the New York area posting about what can I carry legally? Pepper spray, a knife, a screwdriver, whatever. Obviously, they can't carry guns because of New York state gun laws. And honestly, I don't think that they probably would en masse because people need to feel like they are adequately trained, and you can't do that in a short amount of time. So, I mean, that's part of it. What people outside of the Jewish community can do, the security costs for these enhancements that Jewish institutions need to now enact are quite massive. I was talking to a friend who runs a Hillel, which is like a Jewish student union at a major university in America, and he said that the physical infrastructure changes that they had to make to the building cost him about $250,000. Wow. And on top of that, then he had to hire security guards to patrol outside of the building during holidays and the Sabbath, which cost him another $150,000. And neither of those things were within his budget. So a very tangible thing that anyone can do is donate to the security fund of a local Jewish institution or a Jewish institution that is really feeling the pinch, like a synagogue or a Hillel or a JCC or something in a major city that might not have the budget for these improvements, but that desperately need them.
I like that. I got a couple friends who are IDF guys, and they're volunteering their services outside their synagogues and others. But I guarantee you there are service members who are not Jewish who services are needed as well.
Synagogues. I've heard from Marines who said, "Where is my local synagogue? Can I?" And I said, "Here's their contact information. Ask them. I'm sure that they'll appreciate it, if nothing else."
Yeah. What big picture? I forget who I read this from, but he said all this rise of attacks and the blatantness of them is a sign of a rotting culture and bad things to come. That's historically been true. Why? And do you see that to be true as well?
Yes. I mean, historically, the Jews are the canary in the coal mine. And this is a rot that's happening in the Black community. It's happening in the white community. It's happening in every community. The alt-right is rising within sort of the lower class white populations. Anti-Semitism is rising within the Black communities. And I think that there's a lot going on in our society. There's the absence of fathers. There's an absence of religion and faith. A lot of what I think freaks people out about Orthodox Jews is that they wear their faith literally on their heads and on their bodies every single day, and it's an affront to people who think that it's ridiculous sky worship.
I read someone this morning. I'm sorry, I'm escaping on all my names. It was a black man, and he wrote an article about how it's such a shame that there's a tension in the black communities you mentioned and Jews, because Jews and black people were such a united front during the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
There should be a team, not attacking each other. My last question for you, Bethany, and I'm so grateful for your time. What is a subtle form of anti-Semitism that you've seen around lately, right? So, like, not many of us, and none of us are going to go around like punch a Hasidic Jew in the head, right? That's a pretty. But what's like a subtle thing that's kind of creeped into our culture that we may not even be fully aware of, that we're going along with, that you're very aware of?
So one of them was the coverage of this rise in anti-Semitism. The AP, NBC New York, and a third news organization, all three of them tweeted sort of descriptions of the rise of anti-Semitism and these tensions by putting the blame on the Jewish community. You know, the building, the fact that these Orthodox Jews are building so much has contributed to the tensions. No, the guy in Muncie drove 30 minutes out of his way, was Googling Hitler, and walked into a house with a machete. It doesn't have to be a nuanced problem here. He was an anti-Semite with mental health issues and a machete. And that press coverage that does this both sides thing is incredibly toxic and victim blaming for a community that is already under siege.
Really good. Bethany Mandel, I love your work and your husband's as well. Please give my best to your husband. Keep up the awesome work, and I hope we can talk again.
Thanks, me too.
Thanks, Bethany. Coming up next, I want to bring all of this together. The talk we just had with Bethany, and then all the Iran stuff as well. We'll talk about culture next. Mike Slater, true story. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. This segment here, I actually want to bring together everything that we've talked about today. It's a strange world that we live in today where we can't talk about the effect that culture has on our lives. And this ties into the last segment about Judaism, but also into American-Iranian relations, if you want to call them that. So let's back it up here. So Bret Stephens is an opinion writer for the New York Times. He's their conservative writer. I don't really know enough about him to know how conservative he really is, but a conservative for the New York Times is a very relative term. But he wrote an article last week called The Secrets of Jewish Genius. It's about thinking different. There was so much outrage that the New York Times has now included an editor's note because he quoted in his original article from a 2005 study that was written by an author who died in 2016 and apparently, quote, promoted racist views. Now, I have no idea what those racist views were. Every critique I found just made the statement without ever giving any evidence of what those racist views were. But again, these days, racist is just another word for I disagree with you. So I don't know what this guy's views were, but this is from the editor's note. The effect was to leave an impression with many readers that Mr. Stephens was arguing that Jews are genetically superior. That was not his intent. Okay, so not only was that not his intent, that is the exact opposite of his conclusion. The exact opposite of his conclusion if you actually read his argument. People who got outraged, clearly didn't read the article. They didn't read his argument. And what kind of weird world are we living in? 2020 is going to be no different than the last few, maybe worse than the last few years, where someone can make an argument and then be criticized for saying something completely different than what they actually said. Imagine if I wrote an article and said, the sky is blue. And I got criticized. Oh, how dare Slater say the sky's red? Unbelievable. Did you see the Slater guy saying the sky's red? No, I said it was blue. Oh, here goes racist Slater again saying the sky's red. Like what a weird world. That's what happened here. So, regardless, you call it racist, whatever, a fact remains that is worthy of inquiry. That Jews make up about 0.2% of the world population, but have won 41% of the Nobel Prizes in economics, 28% in medicine, 26% in physics, 19% of the Nobel Prizes in chemistry, 13% of the literature, and 9% of the Nobel Peace Prizes. Again, Jews are 0.2% of the population. So what gives? How can that be? That's a fascinating question. And if we lived in a world with actual intellectual curiosity and honesty, then we could have an interesting conversation about it, but you can't. No one could touch it. Because anything you say, literally anything you say, people don't even have to refute your argument. They just refute whatever argument they pretend that you said. Or they refute Bret Stephens for the racist views that someone he quoted once had. We think. Right? Well, I don't like any of this. So we're going to move past that and talk about his actual argument. His argument is not that Jews are smarter or genetically superior. His argument is that many Jewish people think differently. And it's that type of different thinking that tends to make someone an outlier or a pioneer or perhaps do something exceptional, which is what you need to do in order to win a Nobel Prize. So the first thing that comes to mind for whatever reason to prove this example is the owners of the Golden State Warriors. So in 2010, the team was worth $315 million, and they were the worst in the league. These guys bought it for $450 million, and they set the goal of winning the championship in 5 years, which is crazy. And they won it in 4 years and 7 months. Now, they did this because they did everything differently. They moneyballed the game. These guys aren't basketball guys. The one in particular invested in startups. But he took the skill sets, they took their skill sets and applied them to a basketball team, and it worked. They thought differently. Are they genetically superior? No. They just thought differently than every other owner of all the other basketball teams. Now, these two guys happen to be Jewish. Now, anyone could have thought differently, right? Billy Beane, who pioneered Moneyball with the Oakland A's in 2002, he wasn't Jewish, but he was successful because he thought differently. That's the point. It's not the Jewishness, it's the thinking differently part. And Stephen's argument is that Jews think through problems differently. And that, I should say Jews tend to, some Jews do, tend to think through problems differently. And that is culture. Culture. That is a theme that I've been exploring now for maybe 3 or 4 years, and it's going to come up all the time, so be prepared. You're going to roll your eyes every time I bring it up, because I think it's the answer to almost everything. It answers so many questions. We are shaped way more by our culture than anyone gives credit for. The culture of our home, the culture of our neighborhood, and the culture of our country, and that's what ties into Iran. We'll get to that in a minute. What we do, what we say, what we wear, what we choose to listen to, what we think, and therefore how we act, everything we do is shaped by our culture or your active rebellion to our culture. But everything you do, as Bret Stephens wrote, he wrote this specifically, he said, Jewish genius operates differently. It is prone to question the premise and rethink the concept, to ask why or why not as often as how, to see the absurd in the mundane and the sublime in the absurd. It's good. Where Jews' advantage more often lies is in thinking different. I'll give you, that's not genetically superior, that's a cultural difference. So I'll give another example of this, of cultural differences here, and we'll move outside Judaism because they'll be risky. Nassim Taleb, in one of his books, I forget which one. I don't know if it's Black Swan. I forget which one it is. But he asks and answers the question why there are so few tech startups in Japan. Why are there no Japanese Googles or Facebooks? Why are there no big Japanese new startup technology companies? And the answer is culture. Japan, or Japanese culture, is risk adverse. Japanese culture is very much based on seniority, respecting elders, respecting the way things have always been done. That's good for many, many reasons, but not great for startup culture. When Americans hear the word entrepreneur, we think it's good, it's a visionary, a risk taker, it's exciting, someone's going out and changing the world, achieving their dreams. Right? When a Japanese person hears entrepreneur, they think selfish, greedy, untrustworthy. And maybe more importantly, when an American fails in a business venture, we don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. We don't think that you are a failure. If someone in Japan fails, they've brought dishonor to their family, which is very, very different. These are drastic cultural differences, which then lead to very different outcomes. And I mean, we're talking technology startups, but there's lots of different outcomes and lots of different aspects of life. These differences exist all over the world. All over the world, all over our country, right? Different parts of the country. I'm from upstate New York. My wife's from Tennessee. We live in San Diego. Those are three very different places. So it varies, excuse me, from across our country. And also culture varies from house to house. And that's why it's so important. But progressive orthodoxy says you can't talk about culture because that implies, first of all, it implies ranking of cultures. And that implies like, oh, my culture's better than your culture, and you can't do any of that. It also implies personal responsibility, because to the progressive worldview, there's no such thing as personal responsibility. You're a victim to outside forces beyond your control at all times. So nothing, if you're a progressive, nothing can be explained by culture, which is why it's no one looks at it ever anymore. You're not allowed to. So I disagree with that. I think nearly everything can explain by culture. So we're going to talk more about this almost every day. Certainly once a week, we're going to be talking about culture. Because once you see it, it's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. All the time. Everything you do has been set by culture. Now, to bring it back around to Iran, we look at war and we look at battles from an American perspective. The people of Iran have a very different worldview. They have a very different culture. They see the world as weak and strong, a battle between the weak and the strong. It's about time that we're strong now. For way too long, we've had a weak foreign policy. Now, to a progressive worldview, giving pallets of cash to Iran is, we might think that that's strong, that's showing integrity, right? That we are confident enough that we're able to take the high road and here, look how strong we are, here's a pallet of cash. But the Iranians look at that and just see pathetic, groveling weakness. They see it differently than Americans. We've been weak for too long, and it's about time we're strong. That's the language they speak. Much more to do on all of this, on this breaking news day. This is going to be a longer road. This is not, I'm really glad you're here with it. We got lots to talk about. True story. Mike Slater. See you Monday.